At a very interesting time in security research at the moment where we're kind of at like an intersection between software engineering and cybersecurity. And, if you're smart, you're really going to want to take advantage of that. And that's why in this video, I'm going to cover basically some of the tactics that I've been using to build my hacking agents. And I'm going to cover kind of like the meta strategies to go over, the decisions that you're going to want to make as you're building your hacking agents, and essentially just some of the architectural choices that I made. So we're going to get straight into it. Yeah, and also, if you haven't noticed, I'm in a different location that I'm normally in, and that's because I recently moved. So I'm just setting a few of these things up right now, and the background is kind of boring right now. So it's a bit unfortunate. And I don't have a curtain either, so it's like very bright behind me, and I spent ages trying to figure out the lighting. But yeah, it's very cool to move out and stuff, but it does cause a few issues. So anyway, we're going to get into building your own hacking agent today. Something that's super interesting, obviously very on topic now with all like the security stuff going on. In terms of building a hacking agent, there's kind of two main debates that are going on right now. And the main debates are between whether to have like an agentic hacking agent or whether to have one single agent that kind of has a lot of skills and has a lot of tailored abilities. So I gave a few examples here. And in general, the kind of idea behind this is whether to have one like sort of orchestrator agent that is going to basically spawn in smaller agents and then just kind of coordinate them and like motivate them basically and point them in the right direction. Or whether you want to have a sort of system where one agent kind of does most of the work and it just has a lot of skills and like CLI backing and tools to allow it to do that work well. And it kind of more relies on skills than agents. And there's a little bit of a debate on this right now, but in general, if you pick like multi-agent architecture, you're generally going to have like better context management, because when you have this orchestrator agent, the agent can kind of focus on high level thinking, while the agents that it spawns, the sub agents, can focus on doing things like, wrapping through JavaScript and kind of like polluting their context with other kind of non hacking related things, basically like, just running tools and CLIs and stuff, while they just deliver the results to the orchestrator agent. And when you have this agentic architecture, you can build more specific skills for the agents, and you can kind of direct them to certain tasks. Like you could build like a dedicated agent for like JavaScript analysis, say. And when you have this agent, you can give it specific skills about JavaScript analysis. You can build specific tools for that agent. Whereas if you have one singular agent, then, you can build one skill, but you also don't want to build like too many or too big of a skill, because when it loads that skill, it's going to obviously, go into its context and stuff. So there is like trade-offs here. But if you do use agents, then usually it's going to have higher token cost. And there's a document about this from Anthropic. And it's a very interesting research paper, and I'm going to link in the description, where they talk about basically using agents versus like one singular LLM. And they basically talk about it's like 3 to 10 times higher token cost, which is like quite a lot. And that's mainly because the AI has to like basically redo the same task, and it has to like reread the same files, and that's what causes the increased token cost. And also, when you have like this orchestrator agent, you're kind of relying on the AI to manage other agents, which honestly I don't think it's very good at. Like personally, I've found that the AI is not very good at managing other agents, from my experience anyway. And obviously, if you have the single agent, it's just like flip it around at this point. So if you have the single agent, it's going to have less token cost, and the agent is able to kind of like, you don't need to manage anything. The agent kind of just works by itself, and it's just going to chase leads on its own. Makes it a little bit simpler. But obviously, you're going to have one agent with like one context, and then you're going to have to build specific skills for that agent, but you're not going to be able to develop it the same way as an agent, where you can actually have like a custom prompt for every one of the agents, as well as like skills and even like MCP servers being custom and stuff. So there is like trade-offs there. And I decided to go with the multi-agent architecture, mostly because the way I kind of built my tool was hacking specific vulnerability types. And I thought it was better to build the hacking agent that was going to be able to kind of niche down into specific vulnerability types, which is what I decided to go with. And basically, the other choice when you have your architecture is whether your hacking agent is designed to go wide so it's designed to go across a number of different programs, or if it's specifically designed to go deep. So if it's designed to actually go into one program and discover as many things as possible inside of that program and kind of dig deep into the features, right? So originally my hackbot went wide, and when I had this going on, it worked quite well. I can't even lie, like the wide hackbot does work quite well, right? But I eventually pivoted to the deep hackbot, and I kind of explained why here, and I have a few like points for the deep one. But obviously both of these are viable options when you're building your hackbot. And honestly, like it just kind of depends on your hacking style and stuff. But I decided to go with the deeper option after kind of experimenting with both. And the main reason I went for the deep option was one, because I kind of liked learning with the hacking agent. So when you will have like this hacking agent that's going deep, it's kind of discovering like gadgets and stuff, and it's going like straight into the features that you've already tested out. So I'm running out programs that I'm obviously familiar with. So when the AI agent is finding like leads and stuff, I can kind of connect the dots in my head and be like, oh wait, that's actually like a really good chain. And maybe it's actually useful for this as well. So I was kind of like thinking about these things, and I found that very interesting, where, I deployed a hackbot on targets that I was already kind of in the process of working on, and it was able to like learn with me basically. And as well as that, when you have this deep hackbot, you're going to get less basically noise when you're kind of looking at the reports. I'm going to talk about more of this later, but when noise is basically like the random like weird reports that you get from AI that just like don't even have any impact, but they like kind of sound like they do, right? So that's the thing. Like when the AI writes a report, it's like it's actually quite convincing in terms of like reading the report. It kind of makes you think like, oh shit, wait, maybe this is actually like a real issue. When you go into it though, when you start reading it, it's like, yeah, maybe this actually isn't like that big of a deal, because it'll frame it like, let's say it'll be like unauthenticated access to like some service, and like the service name, and it's like, oh wait, that's actually a big issue. And you go into it and it's like it leaks like some demo account or something in the company. You're like, okay, this is actually not that big of an issue then, right? Or that's like a lot of the time what you get. Or you'll get some like XSS vulnerability, but it's like the person has to like do like 20 clicks for it to work, right? It's like, yeah, I mean, it is an issue, right? But it's also kind of like a non-issue because it's like, crazy user interaction or something, right? So sometimes you do get these kind of weird, like, these like non-really relevant vulnerabilities that we don't really care about, but the AI still flags them as vulnerabilities, and it makes it very convincing. But obviously, when you know a lot about a target and you're basically like familiar with them, when you see one of these reports, you can just get rid of it basically instantly, and you'll probably get less of them as well, just because there's only like a limited amount of the AI can produce on one target, right, before it has to actually start doing real reports. And yeah, basically you can just filter out stuff a lot easier as well. But this is the thing, when you go deep, right, it's like it is more work, right, because you have to kind of teach the hackbot about a target yourself, and you have to guide it through. You have to point it at specific things, which means you have to be actively working on the target as well. That's kind of the main downside of it, is that you have to be actively working on the target that you are pointing your hackbot at, because otherwise, the hackbot's gonna like, it's not gonna know what to do, right? It's not gonna know what to do with itself. It's not really like thinking about, how to like go into these type of features. It just wants to find like vulnerabilities, because that's what you told it to do, but doesn't know what to do with itself, right? So it's better to kind of guide it when you're looking at going deep, right? And the other thing is, it kind of requires experience. And it requires experience not only like in hacking in general, right? Because obviously you need to be able to identify where to point the hacking agent at, which is a skill in itself. But it also requires experience on the target itself, right? Because you need to know in the target what kind of vulnerabilities are actually here, right? It kind of requires you to actually have vulnerabilities on the target before you actually start hacking, because you need to be able to point the hackbot at like high value areas where you've kind of got traction before. And that's honestly the ideal way to have this like deep hackbot, is like, that this target was like vulnerable to these vulnerabilities beforehand, and you kind of custom tailor this like agent to go after those vulnerabilities. And that's honestly the best way to do it, because you just know that the target is vulnerable there, or there's like a particularly sensitive feature where there's like a lot that could go wrong. That's where like I would be pointing my hackbot at, because it's just going to do better there. But obviously that requires you to know some things about the target. It requires you to understand how the features work, and it often requires you to have found vulnerabilities in those areas and kind of learned from that. So that's honestly kind of the disadvantage of it. When you're going wide, the hackbot is doing more stuff itself because you can't guide it, right? So the hackbot is going off its own ingenuity. And it's basically completely based on the workflow that you've designed. The AI itself is always going to be the same, right? It's just like a common factor across all of the hacking agents. The difference is how you implemented it. And usually this requires you to build skills into the AI or, do certain like patterns of vulnerabilities that you found across numerous targets. And that's basically how you code into like the AI is you basically build in like your own workflow into this agent, and it will go off and repeat that workflow, presumably on all of the targets. The main issue I found with this was that when the AI would deliver these reports, well, one, I didn't know what was noisy and what wasn't. So I was looking at this, I was like, does this company actually care about this? It's hard to know what a company will actually care about and what services they actually do care about and, what the actual model is if you don't even know what the company does, right? Which is what was kind of happening to me, right? And, the AI was delivering these reports and I was like, where even is this? It mentioned some feature and I didn't even know where it was. I didn't even know where to find that, first of all. So it took a long time to kind of start triaging these vulnerabilities and trying to figure out, is this an issue? And then when it comes to certain vulnerabilities that you get delivered, say like gadgets, like a client-side path traversal, trying to sort of escalate them is a nightmare because you're looking at this target that you've never seen before and you're trying to escalate vulnerabilities, but it's like, you don't even know where to start escalating them. You have to first of all get familiar with the target. You have to figure out, okay, we have this gadget here. Now we need to turn this into a vulnerability. We have this API that we can hit. It's like when you don't have this sort of backing that you had before, it's very hard to start escalating yourself. Obviously, you can use AI for this to try and escalate it, but, it's not always that reliable. So I decided to pivot to the deep hackbot, but both are very viable and I'm sure both can make a lot of money. And there's examples of both working very well. So this is just a choice up to you. And the next part is unfortunately, this is just a catastrophe, but it's Auth with hackbots. So, we know as hackers, right? The best vulnerabilities are always going to happen from authenticated state, right? That's where you're going to get stuff like SSRF, you're going to get stuff like RC. Really, it's when you're authenticated is the best. Obviously, unauthenticated vulnerabilities happen. Of course, unauthenticated vulnerabilities happen. There's open source software you can look at as well. You don't need authentication. But for most bug bounty programs, I'd say like 90% of them, it's like a product that you need to sign up to and the backend is not exposed to you. So you don't know what the source code is until you sort of get into it and you start replaying the HTTP requests and you can kind of build a mental model of what's going on behind the scenes. And to do that, you need to have credentials and you need to go and log in to these platforms, right? And, if we're building an autonomous hacking agent, well, then the AI has to have the credentials and it has to log in for us. It's pretty simple, right? It doesn't sound like a big issue. Well, it kind of is a big issue. And the main issue is these very great companies here have decided to make it very hard for these AI chatbots to log into these applications. And these applications are called Web Application Firewalls, WAFs. And they hate us. They hate AI hacking agents because they developed CAPTCHAs and data center blockers to stop us from basically deploying these AI chatbots. Okay, for real, the systems weren't developed for AIs to log in, but they're mainly for crawlers, right? So these websites will stop crawlers from logging in and basically minting like a load of accounts on these websites and basically stop them from scraping like their data and stuff. That's the main reason these things exist, but they unfortunately are a huge blocker to our AI chatbots, which probably run on the VPSs, virtual private servers on the cloud somewhere, and these IPs are always blocked, which is just so annoying. And the other thing is if you're using a headless browser, like with Playwright or something, you're 90% chance you're going to get blocked as well. It's like these systems will pretty much always block you. If you use curl with your requests, you're going to get blocked as well because the user agent is going to get caught. You're not going to have the same like headers that are getting sent in, and it's just very annoying. So Auth is probably the biggest problem when you're building a hackbot, and this is honestly probably the first thing that you need to think about when you're building it. So what is the solution to Auth? So the solution is we need to basically stop using this data center IP And we need to use an actual version of headed Chrome. So we can't use a headless Chrome. We need to use an actual headed Chrome in order to get past these CAPTCHA solvers and these challenges, because the AI is not going to be able to solve those challenges. Once the AI gets challenged, it's over. The game is over, basically, right? It's just going to sit there for like next 40 minutes burning your tokens up. So we need to basically stop that from happening basically right away. The best way to do this is the AI needs a residential IP address. So basically, the way IP addresses work is when you're in your house or whatever, you're going to have a residential IP address, and that IP address usually rotates every once in a while, and it's, it's not static, right? So you have a residential IP address from your internet service provider. In a data center though, if you have a VPS, then the way the IP works is it is static. So it runs on a static IP address. And also, it basically like flags that it's data center, right? So if you Google the IP address or you search it up, you do like a reverse lookup of it, it'll tell you that it's from a VPS, right? So I use Vultr, and basically if you look up that IP address, it'll tell you that's from a data center, which is phenomenal. And that's very annoying because these WAFs will look it up and be like, nope, you cannot access our website. You have to solve this crazy CAPTCHA. And the AI is like, oh, okay. The AI is getting cooked, basically. So we need to basically give the AI a residential IP address. The way we do that is we have to have a proxy inside of our house, whether that's through a device or through a router or whatever. So we need to set up a proxy inside our house. But the second thing that we need is we need a headed version of Chrome. So we need a version of Chrome that's running headed, ideally with a GPU to maximize sort of not getting detected. And we need Claude to basically be able to do that, ideally through an MCP server, just so it's like normal and stuff. So we need them two things. So the first thing is a residential IP address, and the second thing is a fully headed version of Chrome in order to actually achieve any good results with this hackbot, right? The way I have this set up is the following. So I have obviously a VPS I mentioned, so it's running on Vultr. It's where I used to host my labs before I moved to Google Cloud. But this is where I used to host my stuff, and Cloud is running here or whatever. And I have a phone at home. This is my phone, and this phone is a Galaxy S21. And one day I tried to change a battery, and the screen got cooked. Basically, the screen is cooked. So I basically had to try and save this phone. I managed to type in my password into this phone, and I managed to get a Samsung Dex Go. So that's like basically like an operating system on your phone, which is kind of nice. So I was able to actually use the phone, and I was able to kind of install a few things. Most importantly, I was able to turn on wireless debugging, which actually allowed me to access the phone through ADB. And while I was thinking about what I was going to use for this phone for, I was trying to build this AI hackbot. And then I had this perfect idea. I was going to give the AI the Android development bridge or Android debugging bridge, and it was going to be able to talk to my phone and use Chrome on my phone. And that's basically what I end up doing. So I basically run Claude on my VPS, and both of these are connected together on a VPN. So they're connected on the same network. And basically I have ADB on my phone, Claude on my VPS, and Claude is able to use ADB to turn on Chrome. It's able to even switch on the phone screen and stuff, and it's able to navigate to whatever it wants to. And I use the Chrome DevTools protocol for the Claude to be able to basically navigate through it with Playwright MCP. And that's the kind of solution I landed on, and this works quite well. The main reason is that these phones, they tend to pass under the WAFs a lot easier than other devices. So even if you have like a Linux computer, that can sometimes get flagged for CAPTCHAs, right? Especially if it doesn't have a GPU, or if it's like running, like crazy stuff like Kali or something, it might get flagged for basically having like a weird, Linux version of Chrome that is kind of suspicious, When you're running stuff on this like Android, you're running Chrome on Android, and you have something like Samsung with an Exynos GPU, it's like, as long as you don't jailbreak the phone, you're like never going to get flagged, because the chance of a user like that being like a web scraper is literally like 0%. The chance of a web scraper running on a phone is like 0%, right? So these WAFs are like never going to catch you on these phones, and that's super nice. So honestly, if like right now you are thinking about building your hackbot, and I'm going to talk about this in like the last slide of what you should do, but definitely Auth is one of the things you need to solve. It doesn't have to be a phone. It just has to usually be a device that you have on your house, like an old laptop or something. Literally just like install Chrome on it, like link it with the VPN, expose the DevTools protocol. That's it, problem solved. And happy days. You honestly, better yet, just give Claude SSH and tell it to set it up itself. That's honestly the way that works the best, is give Claude SSH so that if it ever does break, which it might, Claude can just go in and fix it, right? So there's basically no issue. And that's honestly like the way that I found that works the absolute best for Auth. Now let's talk about noise. So noise is something that I mentioned before. This kind of influx of reports that look kind of valid, but they're actually not, and they're actually garbage. So how do we, is there any way to actually consistently get around this noise? Because, at some point you're going to run this hackbot, especially if you're running it wide. You're going to have like 20 reports in your hackbot. It's going to take you the whole day to triage that. And you might get like 2 actual reports out. Is there a way we can reduce the amount of work? Well, there is, and there kind of isn't, right? Let me explain. So basically, the main idea that I've seen on a lot of podcasts and some like guides and stuff is to build a validator agent that sits in between the agents and you basically reading the report. So it will validate the report for you, and it will basically decide whether it's a false positive or not. The issue I have with this is that these AIs, they're basically like either completely in or like hate the report, basically. I don't know what it is, but they're very like emotional. And whenever this validator is tasked with validating a report, it's like a dictator to this AI. Even like hints that this might not be valid, it just gets thrown out, basically, which is the behavior the AI exhibits because it's been kind of trained to do that from user data. And also the companies have found that the users prefer when the AI is kind of decisive and stuff. So the companies are incentivized to make the AIs quite like emotional and quite extreme from one side to the other. And this leads to a situation where the AI will throw out completely valid reports, or reports that were like, they probably could have been real vulnerabilities, but they were kind of like gadget level. The AI was like, nope, it just gets rid of it, right? So that's what I see a lot. That's why I didn't like the solution a lot, because I felt like the AI was 100% going to be throwing out good reports. I was pretty convinced of it because when I ask AI to validate certain reports, even ones that I kind of knew were valid, it would like say that like, nope, this is not a vulnerability. Nope, this is dead or something. Like it would be like this is closed. It would use like that type of language to me. And I was like, nah, it's not. Like, listen, like this can still work. And like only after I get it to do the whole process, it's gonna be like, oh, okay, sorry, this actually works. But if the AI is doing this autonomously, then you're not going to be there to tell that to the AI, and the AI is going to make a decision that's probably going to suck. That's why I decided not to do that, and I decided to kind of pivot to these other 2 features. So the first thing is I built a scale and kind of like a guideline for what the AI should actually report and what it shouldn't. So a lot of the times it's going to report stuff like blind SSRF, which I suppose is a vulnerability, right? But also it has like no impact, and I don't care. So I decided to just explicitly tell it that, I don't care about this. This is kind of a gadget. You can record it or whatever, but just don't send it to me, right? It's like, I don't want to look at that. And I basically made the skill, it's called like impact assessment, where it basically just looks at, what the actual grade of the report should be based on stuff that I've written it. And this has worked quite well. So it has thrown out basically the worst of the worst, like the fucking cookie, like the, the cookie tracker leaks or something, or like the telemetry at CSRF type stuff, which is just terrible. So it has gotten rid of like the worst reports, but obviously it's not going to let everything through because you can't build a perfect rubric for vulnerabilities, basically, because every vulnerability is different, right? Every vulnerability is going to be different, so we have no idea what the next vulnerability is going to be. Next kind of thing was I kind of toyed with this triager agent, where it's different from a validator, where it actually works with me. So the idea was that I was going to work with this triager agent, and it was going to basically validating the vulnerabilities as I'm kind of looking at it. And I'm kind of working with the agent to validate and then also escalate the vulnerabilities as kind of a part of my work. And this has actually worked a decent bit well. So I've kind of only added this recently, and so far it has worked quite well. So I've kind of been, doing pretty okay with this. So the main 2 things that I've been doing to kind of reduce the level of noise is to give the AI skills to actually, stop putting in bad vulnerabilities in, first of all, and then working with the triagers, basically give me a summary of the most actionable reports I should go after right now, and then, start triaging the ones and kind of explaining them to me, which has worked quite well. And in terms of, things that you can literally do today. So if you're thinking about building a hackbot, this is literally what I would do like today. After I finish watching this video, I would first of all figure out Auth out. So I would basically find the device Right now in my home, I would try and set it up so it can run a headed version of Chrome, and I would figure out how I can use it for my VPS. Once you do that, that's like the biggest problem already solved. So honestly, like don't even build the hackbot if you don't have this. If you don't have Auth figured out right now, like a way to get a residential IP address and a headed version of Chrome, there's not even a point in running it right now. Honestly, I'm telling you, these apps are that bad that you're just gonna burn tokens for no reason. So until you have this figured out, do not build the hackbot. Like I promise you, do not do that. The second thing you want to do is build your project spec. Obviously, you know, like now you don't have to code this to yourself, okay? Like I'm not telling you anything like incredible, right? AI can build the tool for you, but we have to give it what we actually want. And that's why I always like building a project spec for what the AI should do, which is just like a markdown file. Like literally just call it project.md or something, and then just put all of the things that you want the hackbot to do in there. So I would put that I want this auth to work this specific way. I want this auth to work on the Chrome DevTools protocol. Here's like my credentials for like both VPS and the computer. Set it up that way. I want a Dockerized application. I highly recommend you Dockerize it. And, you know, I want a Postgres SQL server on it. You know, I want the UI to look like this. So make sure to be deliberate with it. And I recommend building this document out very well and then just telling Claude to implement it. And then obviously you're probably going to have to fix it later. But apart from that, you know, it works quite well. And I actually think that this is much better than using a service or whatever online because, you know, you can actually tailor it to exactly what you need and you can have everything backed up yourself. Third, get a VPS. Honestly, get that as soon as possible. You probably should have it anyway. If you have like a VPS, it's like $20 a month and it'll save you a lot of real effort. And you know, you could use a computer at home, I guess, but I think a VPS is just more efficient because one is just going to be cheaper and also just managing it is like less annoying. So I recommend getting a VPS and using like your computer as like a browser proxy instead. And then lastly, just hand the projects back to your AI, build it on the VPS, push it to GitHub, commit any secrets or whatever. Just easy as that, simple. That's your hackbot done. And you can literally start improving it from there. And after that, you know, it's just going to be iteration because, you know, you're probably not going to nail it first try. I didn't. So maybe with like my knowledge, it'll be a bit easier, but you're going to have to iterate because it's, you know, new and expanding field. Just some other tips before I end off the video is, you know, you want to hold your skills ideally on a cloud database. You can create your like instance anywhere, but you can sync your skills from a database. I use Google Cloud SQL, and it's very convenient. It's just a PostSQL server, and I can literally just like store my skills. I can store like anything I want on it, which is very nice. And something that kind of coincides with that is if you use this tool called BB Scope, like Book Bounty Scope, it's like a Golang tool, and it'll basically pull the scope for a program onto your database. So this is really great. If you have a database, you can literally just run this tool and it will pull all the scope from every Book Bounty platform, including your private programs. If you add in like the auth keys, it will pull that onto the Postgres database. And then it will literally just like let the AI just query the database instead of rerunning scans. That makes it much better because it basically, you know, it prevents the AI from going out of scope first. It prevents you from having to write the scope every time, and it prevents the AI from syncing tokens and trying to find out what the scope is. So it's like a triple whammy to just get rid of a lot of problems immediately. So I would highly recommend using that tool. And lastly, I would recommend you to write your prompts and skills manually. Maybe this is a bit controversial, I don't know, but honestly, I think AI is shit at writing prompts and skills. Like just, you know, from my own experience, whenever it writes these kind of things, it's just like terrible. It's just like, it just completely like misguides the AI that's actually reading the skill. It's like really long as well. It will consume so much usage when the AI writes it. And I just don't think it's that great, to be honest. So you could use like I suppose you could like write like a meta skill for writing other skills. However, I think honestly, the cheapest and most effective way to do this is to just do it yourself, honestly.